The Galactic Tribunal had invited humanity to observe the Resolution Games, a bloodless spectacle where conflicts were settled through elite champion duels. No armies, no war, just honor. Earth declined the invitation, then disappeared from the galactic network. For 2 years, silence, no signals, no sightings, until a fleet of human ships appeared over Cover 6, where a tribunal dispute had spiraled out of control. The aliens were still arguing. The humans had already drawn their blades, and the galaxy learned what it meant when Earth went to war. For nearly 3 centuries, the Galactic Tribunal had stood as the shining pillar of interstellar diplomacy. 27 species, diverse in biology and belief, united under one ideal. War is beneath us. Disputes between planets, empires, even blood-feuding species were settled not with fleets, but with ritual games. Elegantly symbolic, these contests were part performance, part philosophy. Each trial began the same. Grand halls carved from crystal, ambassadors draped in ceremonial silks, long poetic speeches about honor and restraint, and then the games. Small squads of champions engaged in tightly controlled mock combat. Non-lethal, clean, beautiful. Points were scored. Pride was salvaged. Peace was preserved. To the tribunal, this was civilization perfected. The idea of total war, planetary sieges, orbital bombardments, or mass death was not just obsolete, it was barbaric. The notion that species once solved conflict through annihilation was treated as a grim historical footnote, something to be pitied. When Earth was invited, it was out of political obligation more than respect. Humanity had emerged quickly from its homeworld, loud and technologically messy, with a culture still young by galactic standards. They were granted a seat. They were expected to observe. They were never expected to speak, and at first they didn't. Humanity attended tribunal sessions in silence, always at the back, listening more than engaging. When spoken to, they answered briefly, often with a nod or shrug. Their ambassadors wore no ornamentation. Their champions declined to participate in the ritual games. To most of the tribunal, Earth was like a child among philosophers, keen to learn, but ultimately primitive. Then one cycle, a human delegate asked a question, quietly but without shame. What do you do when the talking fails? The chamber rippled with laughter. Not cruel, but condescending, as if a toddler had asked why fire was hot. No one answered, because failure of speech, true failure, was a problem they had collectively chosen to outgrow. That was the promise of the tribunal, that diplomacy, when properly honored, would never break. Then came the Trask collapse. A border dispute over mineral rights spiraled, as they often did. The Trask were new to the tribunal, aggressive, impatient, but brilliant. No one expected them to break the pact, but they did. Without warning, Trask warships entered neutral space. Bombardments began, orbital strikes, cities lost in seconds. Not ritual games, not point-based symbolic duels. War. The tribunal froze. Their protocols had no precedent for this. No ruling existed for a member state who simply stopped playing by the rules. Motions were filed. Emergency sessions were scheduled. Condemnations were drafted. But the Trask didn't wait. They moved to a second neutral world, then a third. The tribunal's fleets remained in dry dock, their weapons long since ceremonial. Their champions trained for pageantry, not survival. It was in that silence that Earth moved. No speeches, no announcements, just presence. One Terran fleet entered orbit over the fourth targeted world, small, old, and ugly by galactic design standards. No gold trim, no ceremonial curves, just slabs of dark metal and fusion exhaust. The Trask broadcast warnings. Earth didn't reply. What followed wasn't elegant, it wasn't balanced or symbolic. It was response. 10 Trask warships entered range. 9 stopped transmitting within 90 seconds. The 10th limped back to the border, half its hull missing. No surrender demands, no victory declarations. Just a tight-beamed message left behind for tribunal records. Talking is how we prefer to start. But if you leave us no other language, we remember the old one. In the next session, no one laughed at Earth's representative. They didn't speak at all. They watched quietly as humanity took its seat, not at the back, but near the center. Not as a child among sages, but as a reminder of what civilization gains when it chooses peace, and what waits beneath when peace is chosen for granted. For a generation, humans had become part of the furniture of the stars. Their diplomats spoke in direct tones, their traders bargained with a strange blend of bluntness and charm, and their ships, reliable if inelegant, wove through galactic lanes with the steady presence of a race still learning the rules, but playing the game. They had adapted well to the tribunal. In some systems, humans were celebrated for their loyalty in times of crisis. In others, they were quietly resented for their simplicity, their refusal to embrace the elaborate dances of political performance. But they were tolerated, expected. Then, one day, they simply started to disappear. It began with a missing delegation on Andros 3. Minor, brushed off. Human officials claimed a routing error, some confusion in the bureaucratic channels. Then a week later, the Valthi embassy, a major Terran hub, was empty. All personnel gone. Communications dark. Still no threat. Still no message. Just absence. By the end of the month, 17 Terran embassies across the core systems were sealed shut. Diplomatic summits, once routine, were canceled without explanation. No quarrels, no demands, just withdrawal. Some thought it was a protest. Others whispered of internal unrest, civil wars maybe, or economic collapse. But then the trade routes changed. Human freighters once common on major routes began rerouting. Some vanished entirely. Orbital colonies stopped transmitting, not as if lost, but as if purposefully silent, and always, always, without ceremony. The tribunal filed inquiries. Earth didn't reply, not refused, just didn't. No known conflicts, no border incidents, no declarations of sovereignty or secession. The humans were not retreating in chaos. They were simply leaving. A few species took notice. Among them, the Taranu scholars, keepers of behavioral records and long-form analysis, voiced concern. One paper delivered at the Great Observation Hall bore the title, "When Lions Go Quiet." Its conclusion chilled the handful who read it. This is not surrender. This is not fear. This is preparation. But most dismissed it. Humans had always been unpredictable, emotional. Perhaps they were licking wounds from some unseen political embarrassment. Perhaps they were hiding shame. Or perhaps, some suggested, they'd simply grown tired of playing games. Then came the signals. Over the skies of Kavra 6, a sleepy mining world along the outer rim, deep-range sensors picked up anomalous sublight movement. Nothing urgent, just shapes, massive and slow. A few flagged the data as errors. Sublight movement was rare in open space, too inefficient for long-distance navigation. Only ancient civilizations still used it, and even then, only under stealth or desperation. But when the signals were re-verified, something undeniable surfaced. Fleets, multiple vessels, large, human signature, moving together, in silence. No lights, no transmissions, no broadcasts. Just gravity wakes and hull shadows, creeping across the dark like ancient titans, waking from beneath the crust of the void. When Tribunal Command received the report, their tone shifted. Not panic, but something close to curiosity wrapped in concern. Earth had never moved like this. Their ships, while well-engineered, were never considered subtle. And yet here they were. No fanfare, no diplomatic declaration, just returning to space like ghosts that had never left. A second wave of sensor confirmations followed. More fleets, all Terran in origin. Their configurations were unfamiliar. These weren't freighters or diplomatic corvettes. They weren't warships either, not in the recognizable sense. Their profiles were strange, black silhouettes without obvious weapon ports, engines damped, movement slow and deliberate. Some hailed them, no response. Some sent probe drones, none returned. The tribunal began debating. Some saw echoes of paranoia, fearing that humanity was preparing for war. Others saw only mystery, another Terran phase of mourning perhaps, or internal transformation, a ritual. But beneath the arguments was something older, a feeling that language doesn't easily capture, a quiet pulse that beat in the bones of those who remembered Cobra's sky. Something is coming, and it isn't coming to talk. Above the scarred plains of Cobra 6, the Tribunal's fleet held position in orbit, silent, still, and watching. They had gathered to observe, to document, and perhaps to intervene if necessary. But no one spoke as the fabric of space twisted before them. The human ships arrived not with ceremony, but with gravity. No musical warp signatures, no diplomatic heralds, just black masses tearing into real space with jagged edges and subharmonic tremors that made instruments falter and crews wince. Dozens of them, irregular in shape, unnerving in design, not standardized, not beautiful, functional, brutal, unbranded. They bore no banners, no colors, no diplomatic tags or broadcast codes, except one. One ship bore a sigil, burned deep into its hull, etched in metal and scarred by age. A broken helmet, split down the middle. No culture in the tribunal recognized the symbol. None dared to ask. The human vessels didn't speak, didn't flash signals, didn't gesture. They simply existed, like someone had carved vengeance into steel and thrown it across the stars. From aboard the tribunal observation carrier, Ambassador Kel Ren of the Valari leaned forward, mandibles tight with concern. "They send no champion," he muttered, "no envoy, no message of contest." Beside him, another voice broke the tension, young, trembling. "Are they going to land?" As if in reply, the human ships moved, slow, deliberate, certain. Their orbital patterns locked in tight formations, overlapping like a web tightening around prey. Then the drop pods ignited. Dozens, no hundreds. Small vessels, barely more than armored coffins strapped to fusion thrusters, burst from the bellies of the Terran fleet. No wings, no glide, just vertical descent, a straight, violent plunge. The tribunal watched in stunned silence as the sky over Cobra 6 bloomed with fire. From orbit, it looked like a storm of fireflies falling toward a world already bruised. But these fireflies didn't flicker with hope. They screamed downward with purpose. In the command chamber, Kel Ren activated emergency diplomatic channels. He tapped into every available frequency, his voice thick with the practiced rhythm of formality. "This is not in accordance with Tribunal Resolution 418-C. This is not how we settle things. We request parley. We request dialogue. We request—" The reply came not from orbit, not from a delegation, but from a single drop pod mid-descent, its transmitter cutting through the static. The voice was human, calm, focused, like someone answering a door they already knew would open. "We're not here to settle." Then silence. No threats, no ultimatums, no countdowns, just the hiss of entry trails as metal rained down. One tribunal observer, an avian species known for their poetic temperaments, described the scene later as a choir of sparks descending into hell, each one carrying a note of unfinished mourning. Another simply wept. Kovra's surface shuddered as the pods made contact, precision impacts, staggered in timing, as if choreographed by some ancient martial instinct. No random scatter, no disarray. Within seconds, each pod split open, not with a mechanical hiss but a grating snap, like teeth bared for the first time in a long, long time. From inside emerged soldiers, Terran, armored, silent, no colors, no insignia, just black plating, matte and battle-worn. Some bore scars of old fights. Others had entire limbs replaced with mechanical grafts, brutal and utilitarian. But all of them moved the same way, like this wasn't new, like this was coming for years. They advanced, not in waves, not in charge, but in formation, cold and relentless, like gravity itself had chosen a side. And for the first time, members of the tribunal began to understand. This wasn't war. It was the answer to a question they had laughed off generations ago. What do you do when the talking fails? The first thing the alien observers noticed was how quiet the human soldiers were. Not in terms of noise, there was plenty of that. The rattle of gunfire, the detonation of proximity mines, the churn of ground beneath drop pod retro thrusters. But the humans themselves made no sound. No battle cries, no taunts, no orders yelled across comms. Just motion. They hit the ground like phantoms, armored silhouettes stepping through fire, smoke, and chaos with the confidence of ghosts returning to old territory. From the secure relay towers above Covra 6, the tribunal observers watched with clinical horror. Each relay station floated on anti-grav platforms kilometers above the battlefield, considered safe by every known standard. They had been built for observation, not for witnessing what came next. Human infantry didn't advance in lines or circles or patterns recognizable to traditional war doctrine. They moved through the battlefield, not across it, like the terrain wasn't resisting them, like it was remembering them. One Zenarian general, watching a detachment maneuver through a ruined ravine under enemy shelling, gasped, "They're not using cover. They are the cover." Even the human armor looked wrong. It wasn't pristine or ceremonial. It wasn't meant to intimidate. It was utility distilled into form. Thick plating marred by scorch marks, bullet dings, tribal scratchings etched into thigh plates and helmet rims. Some bore ancient Terran writing. Others displayed nothing but jagged notches, each a story no outsider could read. And when the Trask finally mounted a response, deploying mechanized walkers and drone swarms, it became clear they were already too late. Drone footage streamed live into tribunal servers. Thermal overlays showed human units engaging inside fire zones. Not near, inside. They moved through vacuum pockets with exposed armor plating, red hot from orbital burn. They fought beneath acid rain, laughing as the compound hissed against their exosuits. They didn't adapt to conditions. They conquered them. In one sector, human soldiers charged straight through an irradiated zone that should have melted eyes in seconds. They emerged glowing orange, steam rising from their armor vents. One even paused, according to the footage, to light a cigarette. In the observation tower above Sector Delta, Scholar Rank Vo Tenhar leaned closer to the display feed. She was known among the tribunal as a pacifist anthropologist, a lover of languages and memory cultures. Her feathers quivered as she whispered, "They're not fighting the enemy. They're fighting memory." Around her no one replied, but they felt it too. There was no hatred in the human assault, no vengeance in their tactics. Just a relentless, almost sacred repetition, like they were fulfilling an old ritual, honoring a pattern, bleeding on behalf of ghosts. Human squads didn't wait for orders. They moved with decentralized flow, flanking through jagged ravines, shifting in and out of structures as if they'd rehearsed in this very city 100 years prior. There was no chaos, just intimacy with death. Each decision was personal. Each movement held meaning. They cleared corridors without speaking, communicated through taps and nods and glances. One Zoran observer called it tactical poetry. Another, less poetic, called it hell-wearing boots. Tribunal Command began broadcasting emergency ceasefire protocols, universal signals, high bandwidth, every frequency, messages encoded in all known languages. Stand down, cease hostilities. We yield, we parley. The humans didn't respond. Not a word, not a ping, not even a glance skyward. In Sector Echo, a lone Trask unit tried to surrender, kneeling, weapon discarded, palms open. The human soldier passed him without a word. Didn't kill him, didn't take him, just moved on. As if the Trask had become irrelevant. Because maybe they were. A tribunal analyst monitoring ground channels caught a low-band human squadcast. Encrypted, fractured, barely audible. They enhanced it, cleaned it. The voice was female. Calm, breathing heavy between words. "Don't stop. Not yet. We owe the silence more than that." The relay tower's silence was total. As night fell on Covra 6, the drop zones were illuminated by burning wreckage and flickering plasma scars. Human soldiers didn't stop to rest. They held positions with dead man's discipline, silent, still, watching, waiting. The galaxy had come expecting a reminder of human strength. Instead, they were shown a glimpse of human grief with purpose. Not vengeance, obligation, not rage, remembrance. And in that realization came dread. Because the battlefield was no longer about who lived or died. It was about what would be remembered after, and who would dare forget again. They called it a war, but it wasn't. Not in the way the tribunal understood war: symbolic trials, restrained combat, treaties signed with ink and ceremony. What they watched now was something else. Something too raw, too personal, too uncontainable. In the great forum halls above Cobra 6, alien dignitaries sat silent as drone feeds played out across holographic screens. The footage had been sanitized, compressed, and language filtered. It didn't help. No editing could remove the weight. A corridor, close quarters, 10 humans, surrounded. The enemy, Traska's shock troops, twice their number, armored, genetically bred for intimidation. The humans didn't retreat. They closed the gap. What followed was not battle, it was disassembly. Knives, rifle butts, elbows, steel and fury packed into seconds. Arterial sprays on concrete, screams short and sharp. When one human went down, chest torn open by shrapnel, the others didn't stop, but they didn't forget him either. One soldier dragged the wounded back behind cover with the same motion he used to reload, not wasting a heartbeat. And then, without speaking, a medic appeared. Not to pull him out, to stabilize him, to send him back in. The alien observers stared. One of them, a serial delegate, tall and bone-pale, spoke without lifting his eyes from the screen. They're hurt, exhausted. Some are barely walking. A silence, then a whisper from a Valthari linguist seated nearby. They're not walking. They're remembering how. In another feed, human soldiers overran a Trask firing position. The surviving enemy, wounded, dazed, unarmed, collapsed beside the wall. The humans aimed their weapons, then lowered them. One knelt, unhooked a medkit from his belt, and began treating the injuries. The tribunal chamber rippled with disbelief. Why? An ambassador gasped aloud. Why show mercy to the dying? There was no official reply, but the translator drone, still running its passive recordings, pulled audio from the soldier's helmet comm. The reply was soft, unreadable in tone. Because we remember being left behind. Across the galaxy, the footage spread, to empires that had long stopped fighting wars with blood, to species that used automated armies or proxy skirmishes. To those who had forgotten that war was once a thing of breath and bone, the tribunal convened an emergency session. They composed a directive, a global halt, a ceasefire encoded in every language of the council, broadcast across military and civilian bands. It was not a request, it was law, and Earth responded, not with denial, with clarity. A human general appeared on screen, face marked by age, uniform soot-stained and practical, his expression unreadable, his words not. Your laws ended when the innocent burned. We buried your resolutions with the civilians you failed to protect. If you wanted peace, you should have held the line before we had to. No further explanation was given. The message cut out, but it didn't disappear. It echoed. Back on Cover 6, drone feeds locked onto Choke Point 7, a narrow canyon road leading to a communications uplink. 6 Trask battalions advanced, artillery, air cover, and armored divisions. At the choke point, one human squad. They didn't run. They didn't call for extraction. They set their positions, laid their charges, checked one another's gear, and when the horizon burned, they faced it singing. The observers didn't recognize the melody. It wasn't a war chant or coded rhythm. It was old, off-key, personal. One soldier sang lead, her voice cracking on the high notes. The others joined, not for harmony, but for memory. Take me home. Country roads. The Trask came with everything. The humans held. 12 minutes, then 8, then 4, until finally the battalions broke formation. Not from damage, but from disorientation. They couldn't understand how the humans were still standing, still fighting, still smiling through blood that wasn't theirs. They'd won, barely breathing, limbs shattered, armor ruptured, but they stood, not for victory, for those who couldn't. Later in the tribunal's closed chamber, silence ruled. What began as horror, alien, incomprehensible brutality had mutated into something more insidious. Reflection. The serial delegate, still watching replays, finally spoke. They call this honor? No one answered, because maybe, just maybe it was. Not clean, not noble, but real. Honor not in words, but in what you're willing to carry when everyone else lets go. When the last shot was fired on Cover 6, the galaxy expected celebration. But the humans did not cheer. They moved quietly through the ruins, weapons slung low, heads bowed. There were no victory chants, no declarations of conquest, no medals pinned, no flags raised high. Instead, they buried the dead, their own first, with reverence, with ritual. Then, astonishingly, the enemy. The Trask corpses were laid to rest not as combatants, but as remains, stripped of armor, eyes closed by gloved hands, names logged when possible, markers carved into stone when not. The battlefield fell into a silence so profound even the native winds seemed to hush. Human soldiers planted flags, but not in triumph. Each was placed beside a fallen comrade, or beside a trench soaked too deep with history to forget. The flags bore no nation, no earth insignia, just black cloth with a single silver line across the middle. A wound, a reminder. The surviving alien observers did not understand until the next day. An alien commander, a Trell-Vin High Strategos, bred for clarity and doctrine, requested entry to the human perimeter. He came alone, unarmed. A veteran from Earth's 3rd Battalion met him at the line. They stood quietly for several seconds before the commander asked, "Why fight this way?" The soldier, armor still caked in ash and dried blood, looked over his shoulder, at the makeshift graves, at the flags, at the still-burning skyline, then turned back. "Because if we don't carry the dead," he said, voice low and steady, "no one else will." The Strategos didn't reply. There was nothing in his training for that answer. That night, the sky above Kovra 6 turned to a dull violet haze, burn-off from the battle still filtering through the upper atmosphere. Alien diplomats, commanders, envoys, they came, not with weapons, but with questions they didn't know how to ask. They stood at the edge of the human camp, not crossing the perimeter, not speaking, just watching, listening. The humans sat by low fires, cooking what rations they had, mending gear with muscle memory rather than urgency. And then someone brought out a small, battered instrument. No one knew what kind, something between a string and wind device. Handmade, personal, and they played. Not an anthem, not a hymn, a song. There were no lyrics, just notes, long, slow, raw. It didn't speak of victory or pain. It was pain, and it was beautiful. The melody carried across the perimeter, slipping into the boots of the observers, into the hollowed armor of foreign dignitaries, into the chests of those who thought themselves beyond sorrow. One alien, an insectoid scholar from the Lathari, whispered without realizing, "I thought they were monsters. They're just the ones who remember what monsters cost." The galaxy watched, and for the first time in memory understood. Humanity did not carry flags into war to claim soil. They carried grief, like a torch, like a weapon, not to destroy, but to make sure no one forgot how destruction feels. They were not built for conquest. They were shaped by loss, and they knew how to bear it, because someone had to. And if not them, who? The war ended not with trumpets nor surrender, just silence. The Trask Empire, once relentless, imperial, bloated with conquest, was no more. Its fleets were shattered, its world scarred, its proud anthem now played only in memory, if anywhere at all. Some said their leader fled into the galactic fringe. Others whispered he walked into a Terran minefield rather than face the silence that would follow Earth's gaze. The tribunal, rattled but intact, gathered its broken pride and tried to move forward. It reopened its ritual chambers. It resumed ceremonies of symbolic arbitration. Delegates once again debated trade terms with elegant rhetoric and lace-draped diplomacy. But something had changed, because now, every time someone said the word war, a hush fell. Because they remembered Earth. There had been no parade when the humans left Cover 6, no broadcast of their departure, no diplomatic handshakes, no final speech. Their black ships rose slowly into the sky, one by one, engines growling like distant thunderclouds. No formation, no farewell transmissions, just a quiet departure that felt more like a ritual than a retreat. They took no territory. They issued no demands. They requested no reparations. They only took names. Of the fallen, of the forgotten, of everyone. And then they left behind one thing. A slab. Cold, dark, seamless alloy. Set in the stone of the battlefield. Half sunk into the earth. Unmovable. No lights. No alarm. No claim. Just an inscription. In ancient earth standard. If peace fails again, don't call us. Prepare. No one touched it. No one dared to. In the years that followed, new generations took leadership in the tribunal. Protocols returned, peace returned, but not comfort, because something had been laid bare, something that could not be spoken around a council table. In private conversations, dignitaries now added qualifiers, assuming we don't provoke another Terran scenario. Well, not that kind of engagement, not like Earth. Across thousands of worlds, when minor skirmishes broke out, piracy, border raids, trade wars, the word escalation would inevitably trigger silence, and someone would always ask, do you think they are listening? On Calaris Prime, in a classroom rebuilt from ash, a child once asked her teacher, what did the humans teach us? The old scholar, once a tribunal advisor, stared at the question far longer than expected. He leaned back in his seat and stared out the window at the peaceful skyline, then answered, that war is not a game. It's a grave, one you either dig with purpose or fall into blind. New legends bloomed, not myths of heroism, but whispers of vigilance, of black-armored soldiers seen drifting silently past outer rim satellites, of derelict human listening buoys powered by grief signatures, of ancient battlefields where no grass grew near Terran footprints. Some called them ghosts, some called them guardians. But everyone knew, if the Terrans returned, it would not be for conquest, it would be for memory. On Zarel Theta, the newly appointed Minister of Peace proposed a motion to outlaw the simulation of human Trask war footage in entertainment programs. Not for censorship, but for reverence. The vote passed without dissent, because those images were too powerful, too honest, too human. And if the next generation watched them with excitement rather than reflection, the galaxy might repeat its worst mistake, inviting Earth back into war. The plaque on Cover 6 remained untouched. It stood while wind howled around it, while cities were rebuilt, while historians bickered over its meaning. It didn't rust, it didn't crack. Some believed the humans had forged it from a substance that couldn't corrode. Others believed it endured because the galaxy needed it to. A wound, refusing to close. A scar left visible. And then one day, deep in the void between sectors, sensors aboard a neutral scout vessel detected a strange anomaly. A Terran signal. Ancient, silent, just coordinates, leading nowhere and everywhere. They followed it to an asteroid and found nothing, just a crater. And in the center, a perfectly spherical stone, etched almost lovingly with a familiar phrase, we don't hunt, we don't conquer, we remember. The crew didn't report it. They simply marked it on their star map. Do not disturb. As centuries rolled forward, in the memory of war dulled in all but Terran hearts, a phrase became common among military advisors. Check your legacy distance. It meant, how close are we to repeating the mistake that calls the humans back? Not a doctrine, not a law, just a whisper. And somewhere in the long, dark quiet of space, a ship drifts, black, silent. Its hull bears no name, its engines idle, its weapons cold. But its memory is active, its grief alive, its purpose unforgotten. It listens, not for praise, not for permission, just for the sound of peace breaking. And if that sound comes, it will wake, not in anger, in remembrance.